Immigration is front and center at the Trump campaign kickoff rally and on Twitter with some high-profile politicos. And candidate Joe Biden has a fundraiser with billionaires while waxing nostalgic about his relationship with segregationists.
Yikes! Team Rising is here to drop some knowledge. Adam Hodge is Senior Vice President at SKD Knickerbocker. He previously served as DNC Communications Director and Senior Treasury Spokesman. Lauren Claffey is a Republican strategist. She's a former Deputy Assistant Secretary for Public Affairs at the Department of Homeland Security. Welcome to you both.
Great to have you both, guys.
Good morning.
Well, a very timely panel. So, Lauren, yesterday the President of the United States addressed immigration, despite the fact that he has been in charge of the office, saying that millions of illegal immigrants are continuing to pour in. Let's take a listen to what he said.
People are pouring in, but we've stopped them. And now, as I said, we have other people helping us, including the country of Mexico. Let's see how it works out.
Lauren, you used to work in DHS under this, but substantively, the numbers have actually only gone up. The laws remain the same. The system remains as broken, if even more broken. Who is to blame for the situation that we have right now?
You know, I think it's a combination of President Trump and Congress, right? Mm-hmm. Because this isn't something that President Trump could solve on his own, even though he's tried his darndest with all of the executive actions. But, you know, it's also a failure on his part that he hasn't made the correct negotiations and overtures to Congress to actually get this fixed. You know, I remember when I was working on the Hill, and this was actually more of a no-nonsense bipartisan issue, right? Border security was something that was constantly funded at a level that was adequate for CBP's request, you know, as quickly as they could upgrade some of their physical barriers, and then also having better surveillance and better border agents. These were things that both parties wanted to work on. And then, you know, you come in with over-the-top rhetoric, it becomes a polarizing issue. Now all the talks have broken down. It's actually a miracle to me that Congress and Mitch McConnell and everyone has come to an agreement to even have some sort of border funding this week. I think that, to be quite honest, I think that's despite of the president and despite of the rhetoric that he's been deploying on this.
So he's been, in your view, unhelpful in terms of getting the funding that...
yeah, absolutely. And
we shut the government down for 35 days and we got nothing. Not a single change to U.S. immigration law.
Yeah, I think that, was it a year? Or I think it was within the first year of him being president, there was actually a moment in which there was an option for some sort of reform. I mean, we were really seeing these increased numbers. There was an initial dip in some of the immigration flows when he first became president because, you know, Central American, countries, they saw him coming in, they thought things were going to change massively, that there wasn't going to be the same pathways to the United States that there previously were. But then once they figured out that nothing was changing, it spiked back up, and now it's coming in even more. But there was a moment where we thought something was going to get passed, but I think that was a real flub on the part of the administration as far as the White House negotiating with Congress, because they kept moving the needle on what they wanted. Right. And so the negotiations broke down. Also, you had tax reform going at the same time, and that was actually the White House's focus, so immigration kind of took a back seat to that. And you could tell because, again, the negotiations were just by kind of B-level staffers, and they weren't getting anything done.
Well, there we go. Tax cuts instead of you change the U.S. immigration
tax cuts
law.
for rich people.
Exactly what the white working class voted for, right?
I think that you can't forget, though, is that in addition to the rhetoric and fabricating the crisis on the border, they've also slashed funding for El Salvador, Honduras, and Guatemala that has helped staunch some of the reason for migrants leaving the country in the first place. Just last week, I think it was, Trump announced he's cutting all funding for those countries. That's only going to make matters in those countries worse. I think we need to think about a sort of plan that helps stop the need for immigrants to head north.
I mean, we've talked about this before, though. I mean, these countries are almost irrevocably broken. Their civil society is collapsed. It would take hundreds of billions of dollars in order to fix them. A measly $150 million is doing nothing except possibly lining the pockets of some Northern Triangle government officials. So why should we continue to pay these people who can't even control their own borders?
I would think that it should be much more money than we're already giving them with other strings attached.
Well, at least that's the honest position.
No, I mean,
it's not. The thing is that it's not the money. The argument that you're making. I mean, it is a combination of money, but most importantly, it's judicial reform and it's leadership reform.
It needs a comprehensive.
Colombia is the example that they use most frequently, and that was because you had a change in leadership that came in, and they partnered with the United States and some of the other countries in the region in order to make significant judicial reforms, law enforcement reforms that outrooted the corruption and pushed out some of the drug cartels and the things that were actually making people flee the country. So I think in that instance, it's a really good example of when money plus partnership actually can solve these problems.
Well, the money can be used as leverage to get those reforms through.
Exactly. But right now we're feeding money into a system where there is no other reforms going on, and so I think until that part, I don't disagree that we need to be doing more in these Central American countries to stop the migration and the outflow of just people who are fleeing these awful situations. But unfortunately, just throwing money at the problem will never fix it.
I mean, there's another issue of climate change is causing droughts and failed crops that is driving part of the migration as well. But Adam, on the politics, I mean, if you take it that the goal is to reduce illegal immigration and that was one of the president's central promises, there is no other way to look at it than that he has failed. However, there's this weird dynamic where if he improves on the situation, then he wins and he gets to declare victory, and that's good for him. But if the numbers elevate, then he gets to say we've got a crisis, and that's also good for him politically.
I'm not sure that it's that good for him politically. Just look back at the midterms, right? I mean, he ran on
the caravan
and everybody coming up to the border. Take it a step back further. 2017, the gubernatorial race in your home state of Virginia, that made a big push on immigration, and it backfired both times. I think people
not in the Senate.
Not in the Senate.
That's
right. But I think people see that running on this issue of immigration in the way that it's a clearly racist, nativist approach and policy, that it doesn't work on a broad scale of the electorate. It doesn't excite the Republicans as much as it does, especially when you've got health care and other issues that are vastly more important to everybody's daily lives.
Exactly. Shall we talk about concentration camps?
Everyone's favorite topic.
Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, I mean, we talked about this earlier. I actually think it's incredible the way she is able to grab, as a freshman congresswoman, grab a hold of the narrative and force a different conversation than what we were having. So in the wake of the president saying on Twitter that they're going to round up millions of migrants, she comes out and says our detention centers on the southern border are concentration camps. She said it first in an Instagram video, then she doubled down on it in a tweet that I believe we have. She says this administration has established concentration camps on the southern border where they are being brutalized with dehumanizing conditions and dying. This is not hyperbole. It is the conclusion of expert analysis. We can have the debate about the word concentration camps, whether that's appropriate, the connotations with Nazis, all of that. But I'm actually, from the two of you, more interested in the politics here, because even if you're not comfortable with that language, she has now shifted the conversation, so we're talking about dehumanizing conditions rather than people who broke the law.
Well, I think this is a conversation that's actually been going on for a while now, right? That's been the Democrats' main line of attack ever since, President Trump came in, right? And we started having this problem, even though these are, detention centers that have been set up, under the Obama administration. So it's a bipartisan problem. But I think that what is more shocking is that she has such a following on social media, right? I mean, it's not necessarily that she changes the conversation or she's saying something that's completely new and forcing us to talk about other things other than what the true definition of a concentration camp is. I think that was probably the most interesting part of this.
Well, and when you have Republicans who are defending this situation by being like, well, we're not killing it. I mean, it's not like Auschwitz, right? Like, not as bad as Auschwitz is not really a great defense.
It's very Trumpian. It's very much like you go to the farthest extreme possible. You declare it. Now everybody's talking about it. We're arguing about the minutia. She doubles, triples, quadruples down. And both sides are happy because many of the Democrats who might necessarily not agree with the use of the rhetoric will say, but there's a kernel of truth in that. That's exactly how it works with Trump. I can tell you from many of the friends on the right, people say, yeah, I wish he wouldn't say that. I think he went a little bit too far.
But he's not totally wrong.
But he's not wrong.
Yeah.
Right? And it's like, it's that instinct which is very politically powerful, right, Adam?
It's a powerful instinct, but I think in this sense, there's a little bit more than a kernel of truth. We are locking thousands of migrants in camps on the southern border.
Well, I mean, what's the alternative? It's to release them. Well, what else are you going to do?
Well, we've had
not detain them.
Well, no, I mean we've had different approaches there. Either
catch and release. That was literally the only other option. So release people into the interior of the country
and set them up with a court date. No, we all agree that we need a much more comprehensive approach to all of that problem. Clearly, like Trump's approach and separating families, that was a new policy. And that certainly took the controversy to a whole nother level. I think from a political standpoint, it is something that gives Democrats an opportunity to go on offense on this issue, just to take the raw politics of it. And that's some would say that's a smart approach and a smart strategy. It has changed the conversation. I can't help but think that this was something that she said on the same day that the young boys are marching at Trump's rally in Florida.
The Proud Boys.
The Proud Boys, thank you.
You can call them young boys. It's fine.
Proud Boys, young boys.
Some of them aren't that young.
Yeah, exactly. There's that.
Old enough to know about her that much, is
Well,
for sure.
speaking of this charge issue, we should also talk about this former Vice President Joe Biden speaking at a fundraiser in New York on Tuesday, open to the press, which was to many of our amazement, in which he fondly remembered the days in which he served in the Senate with Mississippi Democrat and segregationist James Eastland. He says, I was in a caucus with James Eastland. He never called me boy. He always called me son. At least there was some civility. We got some things done.
Adam.
Wow.
Let's start with you.
He could have picked much better examples of
That's
civility.
so charitable.
In the Senate. He could have picked much, but I think the concept is of more civility in the Senate is a noble cause. I think he's right in saying that when he was vice president, he was the one that went up to the Hill to try to help navigate and find compromise on tough issues.
Yeah, and they gave him nothing. I mean, that's, to me, part of the thing with this. And look, I mean, we pulled Sean King, activist and a Bernie Sanders supporter, we should say, pulled some quotes from James Eastland, and we can't even put them up on the screen. They are that bad. For example, in every stage of the bus boycott, this is again James Eastland, who Joe Biden was waxing nostalgic about, oppressed and degraded because of black, slimy, juicy, unbearably stinky N-words, African flesh eaters. Like, that's the guy that he's talking about how he had civility with. And to me, this just points out the absurdity of civility politics. Like, that you're going to compromise with this guy on what? Whether black people can vote or not? I mean, it's insane to me.
Yeah,
and when you
but we got some funding for my dam in my home state.
Right, exactly. Like, at what cost? And then, I mean, and so, but I think this is a really core belief and view of Joe Biden, that like, if we could just go back to this time when you could have civility with someone with views that are this abhorrent, then things would be better. And I just fundamentally disagree.
Yeah, I think there's two things here. One, I think, Joe Biden's appeals to kind of the more moderate / disillusioned moderate Republicans in these fundraisers and in the initial stages of his campaign is interesting. He even refers to the movement within the Democratic Party as the new left, right? Like, he's not a part of it. So I think that is, let's set that aside for one moment. That is a big problem that he is going to have throughout this primary. Is he going to continue down this path, or is he going to try to bring people in? Secondly, I think that his comments and references these particular senators are out of step with the time that we're in, but they're good illustrations of how contentious things were even back then. I think he remembers things more fondly than they necessarily were. I mean,
that's a good point.
Like, these were elected officials. They were representing viewpoints that were mainstream enough in their states to get them elected. I mean, that's the part that I think we have to remember too. Like, this was a different era, it was a different time, and America came out of it. I mean, so his point that this is is messy and that we do need to work together to move the country to a better place is a good one. It's just, it's not the right examples and the right time for the political situation we are in now, because, I mean, we're in a point where people are throwing paint all over Confederate soldiers' statues in different parts of the South right now. I mean, we are in a point where people do not want to go back and revisit some of the harder points and the tougher parts of our history. And so I don't know that he recognizes that is not the right political message for this time, even though his general point about civility and all of us coming through these tough times together may be a good one.
I think that's a good point. And I think, Adam, the final question here is just how is it that the Democratic Party can reconcile itself with this? We just had an African-American congresswoman on who said, oh, but we have to look at Joe Biden in context. And I have to say, there is no way that we would ever say such a thing about any other Republican. It is blatant politics on its face, and that's okay. It's Washington. But at a core level, how do Democrats reconcile themselves with this ideology? Because I don't think many of them agree that going back to this age, or this age of civility with many of the people who they view, maybe rightfully or wrongly, cannot be compromised with. How do they reconcile themselves with this?
I don't think anybody's going to reconcile with Eastland and his views in the past. I think there is a math problem in Congress of getting things passed and getting your policy, your agenda enacted. And you need bipartisan support, unless you're going to change the rules in the Senate. That's a different conversation. You need Republican support to get any big things done. And I think that is something that is the reality that I think people who are on the Hill recognize. And so you're going to have to build consensus on if you want to do big things, if you want to do lasting things that change and address some of the big problems that we have. You're not going to address real climate change unless you get bipartisan support and trying to find a way to move find 60 votes in the Senate for those policies. We did healthcare because we were able to get 60, and we had a massive majority in the Senate, but we still needed some bipartisan support to get that done. I think to do more, you're going to have to find a way to compromise or find a way to work and be civil with your members of Congress. It's not civility. I don't think is a dirty word. I think we should be able to find a way to work together. Now, you can still call out the racists and the xenophobic and those parts of our society when it's right. And Joe Biden, let's not forget, launched his campaign talking about Charlottesville and talking about the terrible scenes there. So I think they've got to find a way to get back on footing and talking about those types of moments and not Senator Eastland.
Well,
the debate's going to be very interesting.
I'm so excited. It's going to be
great.
Popcorn.
Yeah. Thanks for joining us,
guys. That was great.
Appreciate it.
Morning.
Coming up, an annual DC tradition is approaching. The Congressional Women's Softball Game is tonight. We join the Congresswomen, including 2020 candidate Kirsten Gillibrand, for an inside look at how the team is preparing for the big event.
And Facebook announces plans for what it hopes is the next big thing in digital payments. We'll talk about that when Rising returns.